Hi, I'm Winston Janis, and I'm a licensed therapist. In this video, I want to share with you one of the most powerful skills that you can use to improve your mental health. Whether you're struggling with depression, anxiety, panic attacks, an addiction, an eating disorder, this skill has been shown through scientific research to be effective for such a broad range of different issues. It's part of a larger system called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short, which has a lot of great scientific evidence and research behind it. It consists of 6 different skills that all work together in harmony, almost like the steps of a dance. They support one another. And so while this skill can be taught on its own and will still be very effective and beneficial for you, I highly recommend watching the subsequent videos I create. This will be part of a 6-part video series in which I'll go over all of the 6 different essential skills that are part of the ACT approach. Now, the first skill in ACT, the one we're going to be focusing on in this video, is called diffusion. Now, the idea behind diffusion is that we all have this inner self-talk, this dialogue that's constantly going in our heads. We think to ourselves, I wonder what I'm going to have for lunch later today, or I wonder if I'm really a bad person, or I'm really a great person. And we think, well, yeah, that's me, that's who I am. That's just me talking. But the idea of diffusion challenges that and undermines that idea. It says that, no, actually, you are not your thoughts. And what happens is, just in the same way that the heart beats and the lungs breathe, the mind produces thought. It's constantly producing thought. And we have less control over it than we realize. If I tell you to stop thinking completely for the next 5 minutes, can you do it? Probably not. Thoughts are going to keep happening, whether you will them to or not. If I tell you, don't think about a pink elephant, you are immediately going to think about the pink elephant as soon as I tell you not to. Or if I tell you, don't think about it for the whole day, you're going to be checking, did I think about it? And then in that moment, you are thinking about it. So the mind, to a large extent, does what it wants. And so we become too identified with this thing that isn't always in our control anyway. It's constantly producing thought, and we become so identified with that and fused with that. And the idea is to defuse and disidentify from our constant stream of thought. A good analogy for this is to imagine that your stream of consciousness, these constant arising thoughts, are like a river. And most people are swimming in this river or drowning in this river or trying to swim upstream, but they're in the river. The idea of diffusion, when you do diffusion, it is the act of getting out of the river completely, sitting down on the riverbank and just observing and watching the river go by. You're not stopping the river, you're not changing the river in any way, you're just changing your vantage point. You're changing your relationship to the river. So with diffusion, the idea is when you're struggling with intrusive thoughts, thoughts that bother you, thoughts that make you anxious, thoughts that make you depressed, the idea is to not get rid of those thoughts completely, because that's impossible. Like we said, don't think about the pink elephant. It can't be done. Instead, you change your relationship. You create a little bit of space, just like you create some space from the river. You also create some space from your thinking. So you're able to kind of see the thoughts from a distance and not be, you kind of are seeing them as like, well, that's just thought happening, but it's not who I am. It's not so up close and in your face. Now, how do you actually do this, right? So that's the concept, but there are many different methods and techniques to practice diffusion, and that's what we're going to go over next. Most of the diffusion techniques and methods that I'm going to be sharing with you have been tested through scientific research and shown to be effective. However, that doesn't mean that you have to practice all of them. You have to find what works for you, and that may mean only using 1 or 2 diffusion techniques. I'm all for keeping things simple, but I'm going to share with you several of them so that you can experiment and try different ones to see what works for you. The first technique is to give your mind a name. It could be anything. It could be George, it could be Sally, it could be Mr. Mind or Mrs. Mind. It really doesn't matter as long as it's not your name. Because the idea is to begin to see your thoughts as separate from yourself. They are part of you, yes, but you're creating some distance. You're disidentifying and saying, okay, well, that's just George talking now. I'm such a terrible person. I can't believe I screwed up again. Thanks for your opinion, George. I appreciate it. Now, in connection with this, another technique that you can use right along with it is to change the voice of the thoughts, because usually when we're thinking in our minds, it's happening in our own voice, right? Which helps us to become fused and identified with that voice. So when you have these bad thoughts or whatever, you can change the voice to the voice of Donald Duck, let's say, or your favorite celebrity or politician, anything that is the more distinct from you and your own voice, the better. Now, the idea is not to make fun of yourself, right? These voices in our minds, they're a part of us, and we don't need to put them down or argue with them. That's not the idea. It's not to even, these techniques are not going to get rid of our thoughts, like we said. It's just to see our thoughts as just what they are, thoughts. Not something we have to be overly identified with, not something we have to get entangled with or sucked into all the time, but just to see that that activity is happening there in the background. Another approach to diffusion is to imagine that you're driving in a car and your thinking mind is behind the wheel. It's controlling the car. And a lot of times when we're frustrated with our thoughts, we want to kick that thing out of the car completely. But as we know, we can't just get rid of our thoughts. That's not possible. But what we can do is ask our thinking mind, George, or whatever you've named your mind, to sit in the back seat. So yes, you still hear those thoughts. George might be whispering in your ear from the back seat, "You're a terrible driver. You're going to crash into a tree. Where are you even going? Turn around," all this stuff. But now it's your present moment awareness and experience, your direct experience with what's right in front of you in the here and now that's driving the car. And it doesn't mean you've completely gotten rid of thought, but it's got some distance from you. And as it's talking to you from that distance in the back seat, you can just say, "Thanks for your opinion. I got this. I'm in control of the car. Why don't you just relax and chill?" Another diffusion technique has an interesting story behind it. So they did this experiment in which they took a group of people and they had them do things like pick up a pen and say to themselves, "I cannot pick up this pen. I cannot pick up this pen." And write down, "I cannot write this sentence. I cannot write this sentence." They would have them walk around a room and say, "I cannot walk around this room. I cannot walk around this room." Afterwards, they went through a pain tolerance exercise in which they had to put their hands on a hot plate that was just hot enough to hurt, but not hot enough to burn them. And they had the group of people who went through those exercises do that, and they had another group of people who didn't go through those exercises, put their hands on the hot plate. Well, the ones who had gone through that exercise of "I cannot walk around this room" while walking around the room were able to keep their hands on the hot plate for 40% longer than the other group, so that they had a 40% higher pain tolerance. Why do you think that might be? Well, because in this diffusion technique, you're doing something and telling yourself you can't do it. And so when you put your hand on the hot plate and those thoughts arise, "I cannot keep my hand here any longer. I cannot keep my hand here any longer," you realize you don't have to take that voice so seriously. And so in this diffusion technique, we are showing ourselves that we don't have to believe our thoughts when they arise. I want to include a very simple diffusion technique, which is simply labeling or noting. So the idea behind this is that it's probably the most simple diffusion technique you could use, that when an emotion arises, you simply acknowledge it and recognize it and label it. So fear is arising. Or anger, there's anger. Or sadness. There's a strange power in just being able to stop and notice and name something in naming it, we are creating that distance and separation from it and ourselves, instead of feeling like I'm just completely encompassed. I am sad. I am afraid. Saying, oh, there's fear. Fear is there. Anger is there. Practice it and just note that emotion and see how that works for you. Another diffusion technique that will take some of the power away from your troublesome thoughts is to sing those thoughts. You can sing it to the tune of your favorite song or to Happy Birthday. Just experiment with that and watch that it will actually decrease the power of those negative thoughts and help you to see your thoughts more clearly as just thoughts. Another method of diffusion would be to, if you could take these thoughts that you're struggling with or the feelings that you're struggling with and hold them out in front of you. What would they look like if you could visualize them? What are the qualities behind these thoughts and feelings? Do they have a shape, a color, a texture? How do they move, fast or slow? How big or small are they? Where do you feel this in your body? Could be another approach as well. There are so many diffusion techniques, more than I can even go over in this video. But these are some of my favorites, and I hope you found them useful. We may have to practice diffusion every single day, because the reality is we have such a strong tendency to get identified with our thoughts. But the idea behind diffusion is we don't have to identify with our thoughts, and we don't have to get rid of them in order to live our best life, to move forward in our lives. Even if we have troublesome thoughts, they don't have to be a problem. We can invite them to come along with us as long as we hold them at arm's length. So I really recommend you checking out the subsequent videos in this series that I'm going to be talking about, the other ACT skills that work together with diffusion to form a complete system that's going to be really great for your mental health. So I encourage you to like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in a bit.